Yeah, so we just landed on Mars. Some of you may have seen, and that's been super exciting for us. And so I wanted to give you guys kind of an inside look into that, and invite you into this world. A little about me to start. Um, I'm a space engineer, a climate researcher, and an activist. Is how I spend a lot of my time. I was born and raised in Arizona. Uh, didn't do anything notable until I graduated high school, started college at Arizona State. Then I went to UCLA to start my PhD in mechanical engineering. While I was there, um, I saw a lot of things that really didn't have to be that way in terms of higher ed and people being able to pursue their education. So I started a nonprofit called the Student Movement of Justice and Opportunity, or Student Mojo for short. And I'll talk about that later on. But once I graduated from UCLA, I got a job at NASA. And that brings us here. And at JPL, one of the most central questions that we're trying to answer is, did Mars ever have life? Are we alone? And JPL has tried quite a bit to answer this question. Past Mars missions, dating back to, 20 years ago, they've looked and tried to follow the water, because water is one of the key ingredients to life as we know it. We tried to distill what life requires down to the fundamental ingredients, and they really boiled it down to three. The first is energy, the second is chemistry, and the third is water. And so the idea was, if we can find water on Mars, that's going to be the best place to be able to answer that question. And there's tons of evidence from those decades of missions that water flowed on Mars in the past. It looks like this. It looks a lot like my hometown today. But we know in the past that the planet was wet and habitable. You can tell by the rock formations and the sediment and the silt that's in certain craters that those used to be lakes. And so at some point through all those missions, water was actually discovered, and it's underground. And so Mars has the basic building blocks for life, and it still exists on the surface today. And I think all of that progress is just more and more exciting, and spurs us to continue on. So Mars is our neighboring planet, and it's got a ton in common with Earth. The first is it's got the same seasons, because it's got that tilt that you're seeing, and it goes back and forth. It gives it the same seasons we have. It's got the same 4 seasons. What's interesting is that it also has polar ice caps as well on the north and south, except our polar ice caps are made out of ice, or water ice, more specifically. On Mars, its ice caps are made out of CO2 ice, or dry ice. So many of you might know it as, like Halloween parties where you have a bunch of fog that's made from dry ice. That's what it's like at the Martian poles. It's got about 40% of the gravity on Earth, so still pretty light, not as light as the moon. And it still gets a decent amount of sunlight, but it gets real cold there. It gets to be about minus 100 Celsius. But the big difference is the atmosphere on Mars is made nearly entirely of CO2. We can't breathe it. We can't just land there and be able to breathe. And so that's one challenge for Mars. It's kind of a fixer-upper planet. We're gonna have to do a little bit of work if we wanna live there. So I'm gonna show a little video about building Perseverance. So the idea is to understand the possibilities for life on Mars. We went in with 4 big goals, and they all kind of overlap. The first 3 are, we want to look at geology to be able to see what could be in Earth's future. Since the 2 planets are so similar, Earth could be having the same fate. The second is we want to be able to find biosignatures of potential past life, and that falls under the astrobiology topic. And then the third, which is kind of more my field, is to be able to take some of those geologic samples and cache them for later so that we can bring them back to Earth to be able to take a closer look. And that requires a lot of engineering, whereas the other 2 are a bit more science. And then the fourth goal is to prepare to send humans to Mars eventually. And so you can see here the rover's got a big old turret. It's got an arm that's going to drill into the Martian soil, and it's going to do a couple things. The first is it's going to do some analysis on site. And so Perseverance, she's carrying a laboratory on her back everywhere she goes. She's got a lot of interesting science instruments and tools for her to be able to do some really cool science over there and send us the data back. But ultimately, we're going to need to send some samples back to Earth to be able to do the advanced scientific studies that we need to be able to answer that question. And so scientists ultimately chose a place to land that would give us the best chance to do that really cool science. And they picked a place called Jezero Crater as the place to land and explore. And that's because you can see kind of zoomed in here. What's being colored here is essentially in a different wavelength than what the eye can see. And this particular spectrum that we're looking at highlights where H2O is. And so Jezero Crater turns out to be the site of an ancient delta where there's a ton of silt and sediment and remnants of water and access to rocks that are super old, around 4 billion years old. And that's where she is now. And the second part of Perseverance's goal is really to be able to store some of these samples in pristine condition so that we can bring them back to Earth and find out what's really inside. What Perseverance does now is kind of mush all of the Martian soil together and generates a finding on what is inside there. But what we really need to do is to be able to separate and create filters almost to be able to separate what's really in there layer by layer. And that can really only be done with the lab equipment that we have here. And when we do that, there's the end goal of being able to look for biosignatures. And those are really the fingerprints of life. A biosignature is something that only biology can create, only a living thing can create. And there's so many different types. Categorically, there's about 6 or so types of fingerprints that life can sort of generate. And that's what we're hoping to look for. And now that we've landed, the real exploration can begin. So getting to Mars was also sort of part of my field in engineering. All that other stuff, requires scientists of all different kinds. All of them incredibly talented in what they do. And what my specialty is being able to engineer all of these things and build them so that they can get the job done. And so we launched on July 30th last year and traveled through interstellar space, 354 million miles at 13,000 miles per hour for a solid 7 months. So it's just zipping through space. And it arrived on Mars 7 months later, just a few weeks ago. So I'm going to show a video on what that landing sequence looked like. There it is entering Mars's atmosphere, making some slight adjustments to be able to pinpoint on the landing. And now it's shooting through the atmosphere and it's getting really, really hot. So we needed to protect it with a heat shield. So right now that's at about 1,000 degrees Celsius. But it needs to be able to see where it needs to land. So that heat shield is like a camera lens. So now we need to deploy a parachute and we're traveling higher than the speed of sound right now. It's higher than Mach 1. And so we need to slow down a lot. We really, really need to slow down. And so this is the strongest parachute that any human has ever made. Now the heat shield needs to pop off so that it can actually see where it's going. And it needs to now land on rockets because it's moving way too fast and it separates away. So now it's just shooting down to slow down to essentially 0 miles per hour. But we didn't want the rockets to kick up dirt onto the rover, blocking its cameras and lenses and all of that. So we need to stop at a certain point and lower it down on a crane so that the rockets don't damage the rover. We need to cut that line and direct that far away so it doesn't crash into the rover and it crashes somewhere else. And yeah, we needed to do that whole sequence in order to land safely. And so this is our rover here. It's got 23 cameras in total, but three different types. There's 9 engineering cameras that are really just to be able to move around. So we have cameras in the front and the back that inspect different things, a navigation camera. We have cameras that also do scientific studies. And so they shoot lasers and look at other things in different wavelengths of light that we don't see with our eye. And then we had the types of cameras that popped off with that heat shield to be able to get us to land safely, to see where we're going. And so one of those cameras shoots a really powerful laser that zaps rocks from as far as 20 feet away, and fires a laser, and it shoots different rock targets about the size of a pencil point, and it's able to tell what the chemical composition is of that rock. And this type of work is called remote sensing, or in other words, being able to sense something from far away. And this is all over aerospace, to be able to understand something without actually needing to touch it. On the flip side, we are digging up a ton of dirt. And so it's got a huge robotic arm to scoop and drill the rocks. And here it is doing a bicep curl. So yeah, one fun fact that Melee also pointed out, we all have to wear these bunny suits. And some of you might know why, but it's honestly because of us. Humans turn out to be the dirtiest thing in these clean rooms. We're oily, and we have hair and skin cells that fall off. And so it's honestly to keep us from getting dirty, the rover, as opposed to the other way around. We're not scared of grease or anything like that. It's just us. Perseverance is also carrying a passenger, a small helicopter called Ingenuity, and the hope is to give us a Wright brothers moment on another planet. And so it's sort of a tech demo to be able to see if we could someday have something more exciting than a drone, but be able to fly through the Martian atmosphere. I want to show a short video here.
Our experiment window is 30 Martian days. So we have planned up to 5 flights of incremental difficulty.
The very first flight, the main thing is we want to get the legs off the ground. And so we will basically go up about 3 meters, and we'll hover there, and then we'll come down again. And that will be the first, really major milestone.
So that's about it. But I wanted to also share kind of my real journey. And I think this sort of gives a full picture of, something that's more relatable, other than, just a bunch of diplomas. And so, I had some ups and downs. Growing up, I was really the only Asian person in my neighborhood. My sister doesn't count. Made some friends, which was great. I didn't know what I wanted to do. That was kind of scary. Got to college and learned a ton, but then I also didn't know what I wanted to do. So then I went to UCLA to search some more and found some interesting things and started my nonprofit, which I ended up living in my car for 2 years to start. I also didn't know what I wanted to do again. And then I was lucky to graduate and get a job at NASA. And then a lot of hardships with COVID-19. I know it's a very common experience with, and maybe all of us can relate here with what we've been going through. And then, being able to choose your community and centering myself, that's brought me to a good place here. So I want to talk a little bit about how my journey brought me to the social justice work. And specifically, I saw a lot of issues in higher education at UCLA, and it's agnostic to any institution. So one of the myths that I kept hearing was, students in need are covered by financial aid. And it turns out, and many of you may have experience with this, with the FAFSA is a really terrible system. It's a bureaucratic tragedy. It makes a lot of assumptions about students and their families and their needs. And you can lose financial aid even with a 4.0. And so I saw there were a lot of shortcomings of financial aid that weren't working for the real lives of many students. And in Los Angeles, where I'm at, 5% of all University of California students, 10% of all Cal State students, and almost 1 in 5 of all community college students in LA don't have a safe place to sleep tonight. And they don't know where they're going to get their next meal. So, you know, that's brought me to the work. That is the work there. And so what I ended up doing was a number of things, but I ended up living in my car for 2 years to start up housing for students who didn't have a home. And one of those things that I opened is called the Opportunity House. It's a formerly vacant 50-bed sorority house, exclusively for students in need. We don't care what institution you go to. We don't care what your GPA is. Everyone deserves a safe place to live and food to eat. And we set everybody up for success for inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And we try to measure that to you know, make sure it's an accountable system. You know, did the student get their degree? What's their GPA? Did they transfer to the school they wanted? How much debt were they burdened with after graduation? These are all things that that depend on making sure higher ed has the same justice and opportunity for everybody. So I want to tie it all together here. The next frontier for aerospace, at least, for JPL, is to put boot prints on Mars, to show that we can generate rocket fuel and oxygen on Mars. And I honestly think the first person on Mars has already been born, and it could be someone in this Zoom. But we need you on all frontiers to make society better, wiser, and fairer. So, you know, whether you're interested in aerospace or you want to focus on making sure that everyone has enough food to eat, or you're focused on global health so that everyone has access to healthcare, or to make sure everyone has safe water to drink. A whole ton of fields and frontiers, and we need everybody, you know, advancing all these different frontiers. And so, you know, this is your village, and we all believe in you. So lean on us. I'm going to share this slide deck, but there's opportunities to learn and get started in science and engineering. There's a ton of programs that you can join to learn what excites you and what your spark is. And if you like, you know, you can reach out to me. I'm here for you. If you want to learn more about different STEM fields and pathways. Ultimately, it boils down to, you know, students throughout history have demonstrated that they know the way to drive change. That's you. Whether it was SNCC or students marching in Vietnam, or with climate activists and gun safety advocates now, students have always pushed for change. And so, you know, this is your lineage, and so keep pushing that change. So does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. What happens if something happens that you didn't like anticipate for? What if the drone is like strolling through Mars and it falls like through a hole or something? Like, do they like scrap? Like, do they attempt to like recover it, or do they just start over and make their drones more ready for things that they didn't prepare for?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. There's something called the NASA risk matrix that I think you're going to like if you Google it. And the idea is that engineering all of this requires brainstorming all of the worst case scenarios that could stack up. And it becomes kind of like a Swiss cheese problem, where if all the wrong things align, what's the biggest catastrophe that could happen, and quantifying that. And so when that's sort of built out, things are built with double, triple, sometimes quadruple redundancy, so that if one thing goes kaput, it's got a backup, and there's a backup of the backup. And now when things do kind of line up in the wrong way, and say something doesn't work like it's supposed to, then there's usually something that that you can do about it with being creative. And so one of my favorite stories, NASA stories about something going wrong, is that on the previous rover, her name's Curiosity, one of the front cameras stopped working for some reason. Couldn't figure out why. And the short the short version is they had to use the rear cameras and just drive the thing in reverse. And so it's yeah, when things go wrong, you got to get creative. And yeah, sometimes there isn't a solution, but oftentimes if you dig enough, there's something that can be done.
And Lewis, I don't know if you've seen the questions in the chat, but there were some questions a while back. So one was, where do the rockets go when they drop off of the rover?
Oh, I see it now. Yadeli, yes. Where do the rockets go when they drop off the rover? They unfortunately become space junk. And so that thing crashes far away to make sure that it doesn't damage the rover. And yeah, just goes off into, you know, about another crater, and it just drops off there. Yep, can't contaminate the goods. Let's see. I see one. How do they plan to get the samples back to Earth for testing? Ooh, this is going to be another kind of a tricky sequence, kind of like landing. The idea is that this is this rover that's going to store the samples and kind of poop them out as she drives around. That's just the first mission of several in a chain. The next mission will be another rover that's going to be doing some more science, but it's going to pick up the test tubes that Perseverance leaves off, and it's going to take it to a rocket that we're also going to land on Mars, and it's going to collect all those test tubes, drop it off in the rocket, and then the rocket's going to come back to Earth. And so it'll be a sequence that we'll see unfold in the next 10 years or so.
And that last question, that'll be our last one. So how scientifically plausible was The Martian? Have you seen The Martian?
I love The Martian, Matthew. You know, they did their homework. They did a pretty good job. There were some things that didn't make a lot of sense, like it was super windy in the movie, but that wouldn't actually be the case. Mars does not have a very dense atmosphere. So at best, it would feel like if someone was like blowing air on you. Yeah, if you're gonna be the Martian, we promise we won't abandon you like we did Matt Damon.